So when we're looking at Isaiah chapter 14, it's a continuation of chapter 13, where chapter 13 discussed a burden of Babylon. And we know that roughly about 100 years from the current setting in Isaiah's day, Babylon is going to come on the scene, and Nebuchadnezzar is going to take the people captive. And this is going to be the Babylonian captivity. So all the way up till now, Isaiah's been warning the people that they need to repent, that they need to get back on the right track. And if they didn't do this, there would be punishment involved. So through history and through our study in the Bible, we see that the people were very hard-headed and difficult, and they really had set in their minds that they wanted to do what they wanted to do. And one of the biggest things was they wanted to be like the other nations. So Isaiah is throwing out these prophecies of what's going to happen to the people as history progresses. And like I said, Babylon, about 100 years from this current setting, is going to be the new powerhouse. Now, the current powerhouse in the world is Assyria. So we're jumping way ahead here. So when we look at chapter 14, we're going to notice that the first 23 verses are going to be discussing Babylon. And basically, what we're going to learn here is in chapter 14, it's going to start off with some assurance for the people of Israel that God's not going to forget them, but that He will have mercy on them. But they also have to learn their lesson and face the consequences for all the wickedness that they had been participating in. So it's going to start off with some assurance, and then it's going to switch over to talking about Babylon and the way they handled themselves during this captivity. They will have to answer for the way they behave themselves, just like other nations. You know, just because they're being used as a tool to place judgment on Israel doesn't give them the right to come and utterly destroy and kill people and torture people and just destroy the land. It doesn't give them a right to act that way towards other individuals. So they will indeed face a judgment themselves here. So why don't we just begin this morning? We're going to look at the first 23 verses this morning. And chapter 14, like I have on the screen, prophecies against Babylon, Assyria, and Philistia. So this morning we're going to be mainly discussing Babylon. So the Lord's compassion on His people. It says, "For the Lord will have mercy on Jacob, and will yet choose Israel, and set them in their own land. And the strangers shall be joined with them, and they shall cleave to the house of Jacob. And the people shall take them and bring them to their place, and the house of Israel shall possess them in the land of the Lord for servants and handmaids. And they shall take them captives, whose captives they were, and they shall rule over their possessions." So the Lord is having some compassion. He's having some mercy. As a matter of fact, we have three things pointed out here, three statements in verse 1 that express assurance for the people of God. We have, "For the Lord will have mercy on Jacob, for the Lord will yet choose Israel, and for the Lord will set them in their own land." three statements of assurance as we go into this chapter. So the Lord will have mercy. And Psalm 103:13, and we'll turn there real quick because I don't have that on the screen. So let's turn to Psalm 103, verse 13. So, Psalm 103, verse 13 says, like as the Father pitieth his children. I do have it up there, sorry about that. Like as the Father pitieth his children, so the Lord pitieth them that fear him. So let's think about that. The Lord pitieth them that respect him, that obey him, that live their life according to his rules and his ways. The psalmist says the Father will pity his children, the obedient children. So the assurance here is, for the Lord will have mercy on Jacob, choose Israel, and set them in their own land. So as long as the people get back on the right track with what God wants them to do, they're gonna ultimately come out of this. They're gonna get through this, the Babylonian captivity. They're gonna come out victorious, and the Lord's gonna have mercy on them, and they'll be in good standings with God once again. They won't have the separation. So we start off with this assurance, and it goes on to say, and will yet choose Israel. And we have in Deuteronomy 7, 6, and 8, and we'll turn there real quick. But in Deuteronomy 7, verses 6 and 8, Moses reminded the Israelites that God had chosen them. So Deuteronomy 7, verse 6 and 8 says, for thou art an holy people unto the Lord thy God. The Lord thy God hath chosen thee to be a special people unto himself above all people that are upon the face of the earth. The Lord did not set his love upon you, nor choose you, because you were more in number than any of the people, for ye were the fewest of all people. But because the Lord loved you, and because he would keep the oath which he had sworn unto your fathers, hath the Lord brought you out with the mighty hand, and redeemed you out of the house of bondmen, from the hand of Pharaoh, king of Egypt. So Moses is reminding them that they are indeed a chosen people. Isaiah is also in this statement reminding them that you are that chosen people. You're the chosen people that Moses talked about way back in Deuteronomy. You're supposed to be a peculiar people, a people that stand out, a people to where other nations look and say, that's where God put his name. Those are the people that you're supposed to be. You know, Deuteronomy 4, verse 6, we'll turn there real quick. Israel was chosen to serve the Lord as a holy people and to be witness to the nations. Deuteronomy 4, verse 6 says, keep therefore and do them, for this is your wisdom and your understanding in the sight of the nations, which shall hear all these statutes and say, surely this great nation is a wise and understanding people. Israel, the chosen people. And then it goes on to say in 1 Samuel 2, 27 through 30, you know, God also has the right to reject those who he chose. So just because he chose the people doesn't mean they have a right to just go about doing anything they want. So let's see here. In 1 Samuel chapter 2, in verse 27, gives us an example here of, "And there came a man of God unto Eli, and said unto him, Thus saith the Lord, Did I plainly appear unto the house of thy father when they were in Egypt in Pharaoh's house? Did I choose him out of all the tribes of Israel to be my priest, to offer upon mine altar, and to burn incense, and to wear an ephod before me? And did I give unto the house thy father all the offerings made by fire unto the children of Israel? Wherefore kick ye at my sacrifice and at mine offering, which I have commanded in my habitation, and honorest thy sons above me, to make yourselves fat with the chiefest of all the offerings of Israel my people? Wherefore the Lord God of Israel saith, I said indeed, that thy house and thy house of thy father should walk before me forever. But now the Lord saith, Be it far from me, for them that honor me I will honor, and they that despise me shall I be lightly esteemed." So, way back when Moses was discussing with the people that they were a chosen people, you know, that had to make them feel pretty special, pretty special. And in a way, maybe that's why they strayed off the way they did. Maybe they thought they were so special that they could go and dabble in to the things of the other nations. Maybe that's why they did that. But we have a reminder here that no matter if you're part of this chosen Israel, or like today, you're part of the church, you're part of the peculiar people, that doesn't mean that you can go and do anything you want. Just like in 1 Samuel here in chapter 2. Oh, they were chosen. They were looked upon pretty good at one point, but then because of their actions, guess what? The Lord didn't have any favor with them anymore. There was now a division that was caused by the sinful attitudes and behaviors that Eli, and there came a man, Eli, and said unto him, not Eli, but unto the individual and his sons here who were taking advantage of the sacrifices. Anyway, I'm getting a little scatterbrained. But this is a prime example of, even back in the Old Testament, once in good graces with God, not always in good graces with God. You can mess up and get on the opposite end of this. Or if you were already on the opposite end of being separated from God, you still have the willpower to choose to get in this group of the chosen people. So, yet again, here we have in chapter 14 a continuation of the subject that we started in chapter 13, and that is talking about Babylon. So we have an assurance here for the people that He's going to have compassion upon them and mercy upon them, and He's going to hold to His promise. But the people's got to live right, though. So in verse 3, we now have the Lord's taunt against Babylon. So all the way through verse 23, we're going to be discussing Babylon. And we're going to get into some interesting verses here that are going to bring up some topics that the world today try to twist and try to make it mean something different. But we'll get there here in a little bit. So verse 3, it says, And it shall come to pass in the day that the Lord shall give the rest from thy sorrow and from thy fear, and from the hard bondage wherein thou wast made to serve, Verse 4, that thou shalt take up this proverb against the king of Babylon, and say, how hath the oppressed ceased? The golden city ceased. The Lord hath broken the staff of the wicked, and the scepter of the rulers. He who smote the people in wrath with a continual stroke, he that ruled the nations in anger is persecuted, and none hindereth. So, here we have Babylon being discussed here. And when you think about Babylon, I mean, they were the world power. They were the ones no one wanted to mess with. They were the ones that everybody looked at and said, man, there ain't no stopping those guys. They're powerful. They're going to take what they want. And Nebuchadnezzar, the king, I mean, he had such a status in the world that everybody looked at him and they were scared of him because he had so many resources that he could take what he wanted. And here we have it being discussed. You know, these people, this powerhouse, this big nation, they're coming down. They're going to be stopped. They're going to basically deteriorate into nothing. And even this mighty king will have to humble himself. So, all the way through verse 23, like I said, it's going to be about Babylon. And when you look at history and you look at timestamps, the Babylons were already beginning to try to reassert themselves into the mix of being a powerful nation. And we're basically looking at around the end of the 8th century BC era is when this is taking place. And like I said before, it was going to be more than about 100 years from this time period that Isaiah is telling the people about this prophecy. So when we look at this and we're thinking about Babylon, you know, Babylon's judgment reminds us that all men everywhere will give account to God. Not just the people of Israel, not just God's people. Today it won't be just the members in the Lord's church that will have to give account for the actions that they had while on this earth. And that is no different today than it was back then. These heathen nations had to give account for what they did and why they did not choose God. They will give account for that. In verses 5 and 6, we read that the Lord hath broken the staff of the wicked and the scepter of the rulers. He who smote the people in wrath with a continual stroke, he that ruled the nations in anger is persecuted, and none hindereth. So, no man or nation is greater than God, and that's the ultimate picture that Isaiah is painting here. It's going to seem like a lost cause when the people go into this Babylonian captivity. But basically what Isaiah is trying to give them is some assurance and hope in knowing that God is not going to forget about them. God is basically no different than any of us parents who discipline their children when they've done wrong. The people are being disciplined for chasing after other nations, chasing after these idols. And basically, when you look at Babylon, they're in captivity, they're being treated horribly, and they've probably given up. There's no way out of this. But Isaiah is basically saying there's no man or nation. Babylon and Nebuchadnezzar is not greater than God. Most people look and do not see, listen and do not hear, want knowledge and never study. So when you think about this and you think about all these wise individuals in the world, And we're talking about Babylon here, these wise individuals. Babylon could be described just like in 2 Timothy 3:7, ever learning, never able to come to the knowledge of the truth. Oh, they were smart when it came to the world and science, but when it came to religion and spirituality and the God of heaven, they just didn't have it. They didn't have the knowledge. So they were ever learning and never able to come to the knowledge of the truth. They were very hard-hearted. They were very prideful. They were very self-centered. Babylon had everything except what really counted. They possessed gold, but they did not have godliness. Power and influence, but they did not have obedience to God, which separated them. They were not able to be this chosen people, God's people. And the reason is they went after the worldly materials. They went after self-centeredness and pride and power. And they did not take the time to learn what the God of heaven was all about and how much better life would be if they just simply changed their ways. So in verses 7 through 12, it's going to be interesting here. And I want us to take into the context of what we're discussing. We've already started our discussion here. We're talking about Babylon and how prideful they were and the fact that they could not stand up against God. God was going to have His judgment on them, and they would answer for the actions that they chose to do. So verse 7 says, the whole earth is at rest and is quiet. They break forth into singing. Excuse where I got up there. The parable continues. That's not even supposed to be up there. But anyway, overlook that. Verse 8 says, yea, the fir trees rejoice at thee, the cedars of Lebanon, saying, since thou art laid down, no feller is come up against us. Hell from beneath is moved for thee, to meet thee at thy coming. It stirreth up the dead for thee, even all the chief ones of the earth. It hath raised up from their thrones all the kings of the nations. All they shall speak and say unto thee, art thou also become weak as we? Art thou become like unto us? Thy pomp is brought down to the grave, and thy noise of thy vials, the worm is spread under thee, and the worms cover thee. How art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning? How art thou cut down to the ground, which didst weaken the nations? All of this is describing this powerful Babylon who has been brought down and humbled. They're being disciplined. And the world is looking at this happening and they're saying, wow, there's peace now. There's peace. This great nation who were going around and destroying people, they're being brought down. Is this really true in verse 10? The people would say, art thou also become weak as we? Art thou become like unto us? Have you been humbled down to just a normal man now? So let's look at these verses. Let's look at verse 7. Verse 7 says, the whole earth is at rest and is quiet. They break forth into singing. And I've got a note up here. The promise of rest from the oppression of Babylon calls the nations to break forth into singing. Think about how great that is to have this tyrant in the world who was just overbearing all these other nations, and to see him brought down, and now you don't have that cloud lingering over your head. And all the nations are now breaking forth into singing because they have finally seen the mighty Babylon brought down to its knees, knocked off of his high horse. In verse 8 it says, "Yea, the fir trees rejoice at thee, and the cedars of Lebanon, saying, Since thou art laid down, no feller is come up against us." And I should have read verse 8 or verse 9, which says, "Hell from beneath is moved for thee to meet thee at thy coming. It stirreth up the dead for thee, even all the chief ones of the earth. It hath raised up from the thrones all the kings of the nations." So when you look at this verse here, and you look at verse 9, and you see that word hell. Hell from beneath is moved for thee to meet thee at thy coming. So the other word for this is shew, and I've got up here on the screen, Hades, or the world of the dead, would be there to receive them when they die. In other words, a holding place. A holding place for the dead was going to be there waiting for them. Did you say?
Luke 16.
Luke 16? You already there?
I can go there. I believe it starts like in verse 23.
Yeah, go ahead, Clark.
Speaking about Abraham, Lazarus and the rich man. Verse 23, Christ says, "And in hell he lifted up his eyes, being in torments, and seeth Abraham afar off, and Lazarus in his bosom. And he cried and said, Father Abraham, have mercy on me, send Lazarus that he may dip his finger in water and cool my tongue, for I am tormented in this fire. But Abraham said, Son, remember that thou in thy lifetime received thy good things, and likewise Lazarus evil things. But now he is comforted that thou art tormented. And beside all this, between us and you there is a great gulf fixed, so that they which could not pass against you cannot, neither can they pass to us that would come from thence. Then he said, I pray thee, therefore, Father, that thou wouldst send him to my father's house, for I have 5 brothers, that he may testify to them, lest they also come to this place of torment. Abraham said unto him, They have Moses and the prophets, let them hear them. And he said, Nay, Father Abraham, but if no man comes again from the dead, they will repent. And he said unto him, If they hear not Moses and the prophets, neither will they be persuaded that one rose from the dead.
That's right. And, there's no escaping that. Just because these people passed away on this earth, they're still going to have to go to this world of the dead.
They will stay there after the Lord comes back.
That's right.
And when we read Thessalonians, where it says, The dead in Christ shall rise first. They got to rise from somewhere. And Paul tells us in Corinthians that paradise is the third heaven. We cannot see. That's not where God is.
That's right.
This place, Sheol, Hades, is not eternal. Tartarus is eternal. The eternal hell that Christ will put people in when he comes to sentence them, because Hebrews chapter 9 verse 27 says it is appointed unto men once to die, but after this the judgment. So if you're going to end up in Hades, you're going to receive some judgment. If you're either going to be in paradise or torment. And then when Christ comes, he's going to sentence you and put you in your eternal place.
You got it. You got it. So verse 9 is even saying they're not going to escape the fact that Sheol is going to open up and accept every one of them in. They're going to go to this holding place, dead world for the dead. It says, hell from beneath is moved for thee to meet thee at thy coming. It stirreth up the dead for thee, even all the chief ones of the earth. It hath raised up from their thrones all the kings of the nations. And verse 10 says, all they shall speak and say unto thee, art thou also become weak as we? Art thou become like unto us? Now this is Babylon. These are questions towards Babylon, towards the kings of Babylon in verse 10. And it shows the beginning of this reversal of fortunes. Remember, Babylon had all the gold you can imagine, the power over other nations, and the reversal of all these fortunes that he once had was being done away with. Instead of being mighty, he had become weak like us. No man and no nation will ever stand up against God and get in the way of what God wants to happen, what God's plans are. Just like the church today. Christ died on the cross for our sins. He purchased the church with His blood. There's not one man on this earth that will ever destroy that or take that away. Nobody, no nation can take any of that away. And the picture being painted here is, those who are the chosen ones of God are those that respect Him and live obediently unto Him. And for all these wicked people in the world who think they can put an end to that, they're in for a rude awakening, because they're going to be knocked down real fast, and they're not going to be mighty anymore. They're going to be weak just like anyone else. And we go on here in verse 11, speaking of Babylon, thy pomp is brought down to the grave, and the noise of thy vials. The worm is spread under thee, and the worms cover thee. So instead of the pomp and glory experienced while living, this ruler now had maggots for a bed and worms for a covering. He was brought down to nothing. And then in verse 12, it says, how art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning? How art thou cut down to the ground, which didst weaken the nation? So, this verse here is definitely a topic for a lot of people in the world. So one of the first things people want to say is, who do they try to say Lucifer is?
Satan.
They try to say that's Satan. So does anyone know what Lucifer actually means?
It's a king or the bright and morning star, isn't it?
That's right.
And Christ refers himself that way in Revelation chapter 22 and verse 16. This is talking about verse 12 is talking about the king of Babylon.
That's right.
Not the devil. Now I have a cross reference in here for Luke 10:18 that says, he saw Satan fall like lightning from the sky.
Yeah,
I think that's a bad reference.
I think so too.
That's a bad cross reference. We should not. We should look up the word first.
That's right.
Because I heard too many people talk about Lucifer, and when I ran across this verse the first time I saw it, I looked it up. I said, I've never heard God call Lucifer, the devil Lucifer. He's the dragon, the old beast, the serpent,
Yeah.
Satan, the devil, the deceiver. I've never heard him call him Lucifer. So I looked it up. It says it's the king and the bright and morning star. Then when I run across that in Revelation, I said, well, Jesus is the king of the righteous.
Yeah. That's right.
So he refers himself as the bright and morning star in Revelation 22. So we know it's not for them.
And this is why people have to stay in the context of what's being discussed.
This is the only time this word's ever in the Bible, too, I believe.
So the context throughout chapter 14 and these previous verses has all been discussing Babylon. And here we have in verse 12, "How art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning? How art thou cut down to the ground, which didst weaken the nations?" So just like you said, Clark, instead of Babylon being the star of the morning, he had been cut down to the earth. And we're going to touch on this a little bit here in a minute. We're going to look at some things in the book of Daniel that actually show some events of how Babylon and Nebuchadnezzar were humbled and brought down because of their pridefulness and their self-centeredness. But yes, Lucifer is not the devil. And when we look at the context, it points that out so clearly that when the verses before this are all about Babylon, and then the verses right after this are talking about Babylon, why would there be a verse out of just nowhere that suddenly wanted to talk about the devil? It just wouldn't make sense. You have to stay in the context.
It messed up when they read where it said he wanted to exalt his throne above the star of God. Verse 13. I think that's where he mixed that.
Well, and when you do your study on Nebuchadnezzar and Babylon, he did try to exalt himself.
Well, isn't there an example, is it in the book of Acts or somewhere, where that king wanted to put himself up above God, and he gave him goes and worms and got him right there on the spot?
Yeah, that was an example. That was. And we're going to look here in a little bit, in the next few minutes, actually. Well, I need to get rolling. But we're going to see in the book of Daniel some examples here of Nebuchadnezzar trying to exalt himself above God. So let's move along. Verse 13 says, "And thou saidst in thy heart, I will ascend into heaven, I will exalt my throne above the stars of God, I will sit upon the mount of congregation in the uttermost parts of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will make myself high, or make myself like the Most High." So when we look at those two verses, and we're talking about the king of Babylon boasting about his power and how he wanted to make himself like the Most High, we can't help but think about the book of Daniel and the examples that we had. And, you know, I'm just wondering if I should turn this into a two-part series. It's 10:40. Let's keep going. I think we can do this. So let's go to the book of Daniel. And let's look at some examples of Nebuchadnezzar and the attitude that Nebuchadnezzar had. And really it starts in Daniel chapter 2 when Nebuchadnezzar had this dream that he wanted everybody to tell him what the dream meant. And when around verse 10 is when the Chaldeans answered before the king and said, "There's not a man upon the earth that can show the king's matter. Therefore there is no king, lord, ruler asked such things of a magician or as an astrologer or Chaldean." So just looking at the type of man that Nebuchadnezzar is, he was a man that was used to getting what he asked for. So he wanted to know what the dream meant. Well, when they started telling him that they couldn't do it, In verse 12 it says, For this cause the king was angry and furious. He's not getting his way. And he commanded to destroy all the wise men of Babylon. So he was upset about that. And then if you go over to chapter 3, the king made an image of gold. In verse 1, Nebuchadnezzar the king made an image of gold, whose height was 60 cubits, and the breadth thereof 6 cubits. And he set it up in the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. So here we have again, he's going to make a statue now. Now what does he want to do with this statue? He wants people to come and worship it like it's some sort of god, that he's like a god. Come worship my statue. So what happens? He gets all these people of the nations, and they had to gather together. And if they didn't bow down and worship to his statue that he made, then guess what? You're going to be thrown into this fiery furnace. You're going to be burned to death. And then, as we see, this is where Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego come in, and they actually refused to do it. And God ended up taking care of them. But what I'm trying to point is the attitude, the pridefulness, and the self-centeredness of Nebuchadnezzar. He's building statues. He's trying to force people to worship him. And then as you go on, we've got in chapter 4, in verse 28, it says, All this came upon King Nebuchadnezzar. And in verse 29 it says, And at the end of the 12 months he walked in the palace of the kingdom of Babylon. The king spake and said, Is not this great Babylon that I have built for the house of the kingdom by the might of my power and for the honor of my majesty? While the word was in the king's mouth, there fell a voice from heaven saying, O King Nebuchadnezzar, to thee it is spoken, the kingdom is departed from thee. And they shall drive thee from men, and thy dwelling shall be the beasts of the field, and they shall make thee eat grass as oxen. 7 times shall pass over thee, until thou know that the Most High ruleth in the kingdom of men, and giveth to whomsoever he will. So here we have this prideful king looking at everything around him, and the only honor and glory that he gives is to himself. And then we get a glimpse of what's going to happen to him, and how he, just like we read in the previous verses, he was going to be brought down to nothing. And then here we have in verses 13 and 14 talking about this king. And thou saidst in thy heart, in which we see that he did in chapter 4 of Daniel, I will ascend into heaven, exalt my throne above the stars of God, sit upon the mount of congregation, uttermost parts of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will make myself most high. So just like in Daniel 4, just like in Daniel 3, and just like in Daniel chapter 2, this individual wanted to be worshiped. He wanted to make himself like the Most High. In verse 15, Yet thou shalt be brought down to Sheol, to the uttermost parts of the pit. They that see thee shall gaze at thee, they shall consider thee, saying, Is this the man that made the earth to tremble, and did shake kingdoms, that made the world as a wilderness, and overthrew the cities thereof, that let not loose the prisoners to their home? All the kings of the nations, all of them sleep in glory, every one in his own house. But thou art cast forth away from the sepulchre like an abominable branch, clothed with the slain, and are thrust through with the sword, that go down to the stones of the pit as a dead trodden underfoot. Verse 15, Isaiah states that the king would be brought down to Sheol, to the uttermost parts of the pit. The statement would cause amazement as this extreme reversal of fortunes are taking place, just like stated in verses 16 and 17. And then in verses 18 and 19, he would be like a rejected branch or trampled corpse, which did not have even a fitting burial. This is what's happening to Babylon. And very quickly, we'll look at these verses here. Verses 20 through 23 says, "Thou shalt not be joined with them in burial, because thou hast destroyed thy land, thou hast slain thy people. The seed of evildoers shall not be named forever. Prepare ye slaughter for his children, for the iniquity of their fathers, that they rise not up and possess the earth and fill the face of the world with cities. And I will rise up against them, saith Jehovah of hosts, and cut off from Babylon name and remnant, son and son's son, saith Jehovah. I will also make it a possession for the porcupine and the pools of water, and I will sweep it with the bosom of destruction, saith Jehovah of hosts." The cause of these bad things on the king is because of his arrogance, his pridefulness, and his attitude that were seen back in verses 13 and 14. Verse 20, the king had brought ruin on his own country, and in verse 23 paints a picture of total destruction for Babylon. And I did have a few other things that I could present to you guys, but I think that maybe we've covered enough at this point. And if there's not any questions or additional points from anybody, then I'm going to say that class is going to be dismissed. So I guess class is dismissed.